Well, this morning we speak to someone who played an incredible, indescribable, and dare I say indelible role in South Africa's liberation struggle. He's someone who was not only a dear friend of the marginalized in our country, but he was also a close comrade and confidant to the father of the nation, Nelson Mandela. Human rights lawyer and activist George Bizos is with us in studio to take us through his new book, 65 Years of Friendship, which details the strong and long-lasting bond that he had with Udada. Advocate, it is such a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you for asking me.
You said to me off air that you're always up before 6 a.m., so we don't feel that bad about dragging you out of bed this morning on a rather chilly day. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Now, we have witnessed your literary, genius in your works, such as No One to Blame, Odyssey to Freedom. You've described this offering as a short book about a long friendship. What inspired it?
Well, I sit back. I'm about to be 90 years of age, but I think back to 1948 when I was a first-year student. Nelson Mandela had an arts degree and was hoping to get a law degree and become the first black advocate at the Johannesburg Bar. The dean made it very difficult, impossible for him to get an LLB degree. 1948 was the year in which the nationalists won the election. In Parliament, a member of the Nationalist Party asked Prime Minister Malan, what is going on at a university where blacks and whites sit in the same room, and worse too, that, using the K word, walk hand in hand with white girls on the campus. And it was said that Malan asked the leaders of the university what was going on. And Malan in Parliament replied that the trouble is made by a small group of leftists, but the thing will be rectified. And I was a first-year student, 4 years older than the average because I was a refugee and didn't go to school for almost 4 years. And I made a speech in the Great Hall. If wanting equal treatment for our black fellow students makes me a leftist, I'm proud to be one. The next morning, in the Transvaal, the newspaper of the Nationalist Party in Afrikaans, headline, front page, linksgesind en trots daarop. You understand that? No people will, but this is what George Bizos said. And this cost me. I was refused citizenship for over 30 years, like Nelson Mandela.
In fact, I'm glad you touched on that, because in the book's foreword, Judge Dekgang Moseneke puts it as follows, and I'd like to quote him. He says, both of you were pursuing your postgraduate Bachelor of Laws degree, viewing to qualify as practicing lawyers. You were both outsiders to, if not foes, of the apartheid ruling elite. George Bizos was a Greek immigrant, yet to be admitted to South African citizenship. Nelson Mandela was a denigrated citizen in his own land of birth. So we can see that you had many things in common. But I'd like to know, as far as personality and character was concerned, did you have areas where you were different?
Hardly, except the color of our skins, I suppose. But he couldn't come and become an advocate. I couldn't become an attorney because I didn't have citizenship. But I could become an advocate because this was the law as it stood. And when I became an advocate in 1954, he started in partnership with Oliver Tambo, and they gave me a lot of work to represent people that didn't have much money, but they nevertheless came from all over the country to Mandela and Tambo's office, directly opposite the magistrate's court, contrary to the laws, but they didn't close them up, and they sent me to all the dorps throughout the country where the people, particularly women who burned passes, men who didn't pull their weight or wanted to introduce political theory, and things got worse in the eyes of the government. Duma Nokwe, the first African advocate, became a member of the bar, and the people that were supporters of apartheid said, "What is this? Let him go and open an office in Soweto, not His Majesty's buildings, in Commissioner Street in Johannesburg, which is for whites only."
Now, throughout the ebb and flow of your relationship, I think the demands on your friendship changed somewhat. So you became, as Judge Musaneke puts it, dedicated and trustworthy counsel through the multiple trials of Nelson Mandela. But more importantly, throughout his daunting decades of imprisonment, you provided support for his legal and familial needs. You also served as a trustworthy political envoy to O.R. Tambo and other activists. Could you tell us about that metamorphosis of your friendship?
Well, it was very close. We didn't have any secrets. His first marriage came to an end. He was concerned about the education of his children. And he was banned, and he expected, from time to time, he was arrested. And he asked me to do what I can for the family, which I tried together with the colleague Arthur Chaskelson, who was also a very close friend because we did the Rivonia trial together. And with his second marriage to Winnie, about a month after the marriage, he phoned me and said, "George, I've married trouble." "What's happened?" "Winnie has been arrested." "What for?" she's alleged to have assaulted a policeman. Well, let her come and see me. She came to the office dressed to kill.
Mm-hmm. Wouldn't expect anything less.
What happened? She said, he came before sunrise to our house, opened the door, came for the bedroom. I wasn't properly dressed. He took my arm and wanted to pull me out of the bedroom. I resisted. I don't know what happened. He lost his balance, fell and broke his arm. I defended myself. I wasn't prepared to be half-dressed and taken away and arrested. And she put it in her book precisely that way, her first book. And she reminded the readers what I told her when we were about to enter the magistrate's court. Winnie, walk in like a lady and not an Amazon. And she laughed like you did. And I defended her for about 22 cases, even when the relationship between her and Nelson waned, even particularly after his release. But I don't want to talk about that because, she was my client, 22 cases, and lawyers don't really talk about their clients.
Mm-hmm. But we can't ignore that, part of this loyalty and friendship that you had with Madiba eventually saw you having to stand up against family members as well. His two children, Mama Winnie, etc., handling the estate, the trust, and all of that. What did it take from you to be able to do that in terms of loyalty and commitment to a dear friend?
Well, he was convicted to life imprisonment at the end of the trial. He actually said, watch yourself. There are enough of us going to prison. Don't get into any trouble. We need you to look after our families and also to come and visit us so that we can know what is going on. In the beginning, they made it a little difficult for me to go to Robben Island and stay long. But as time went on, I could spend the day there, even though they thought that sooner or later, according to the top man in the government, he saw me the first time, and I spent time with Nelson. He said, this is the last time you come here as a lawyer. We'll prepare a special cell for you next to Nelson. But it didn't happen. I was careful, being only a lawyer, but standing up that the law and justice should be respected. And of course, I became involved in representing people whose loved ones were killed in detention. And it was a friendship, nothing formal about it. when he was released, he regularly came to us, particularly on Sunday, for lunch. And I was taken by mother-in-law back to her flat in the city after lunch on a Sunday, and I had to hand the document over to Nelson, which I had prepared. I parked in his parking place at home and went in. Instead of just handing in the document, we had to discuss it a bit.
Your mother-in-law is still in the car at the time?
In the car.
Okay.
In the car. And when we finished, he accompanied me to the car. He saw my mother-in-law and shouted at her, what sort of a mother are you that you allowed your daughter to marry the man like this that leaves you in the car?
And doesn't come with you when he's handing over this document. And I assume you took longer than 2 minutes.
Yes, about 10 minutes. You see, and he didn't know that there was somebody in the car. And anyway, my mother-in-law laughed. And he was like that. We were really not very formalistic about and Grasha and he and my late wife, she passed away only a month ago, went to Greece together for 2 weeks. We had a wonderful time with her.
You mentioned your wife, and again, I must pass my condolences to you and your loved ones. You say, other than your relationship with your mother and your relationship with your wife, the friendship that you had with Udada is the longest relationship you've ever had in your life. In politics, we often say there are no permanent friends or foes. What do you think it was about your relationship that made it stand the test of time?
Well, I was brought up in a democratic family. My father was kicked out of the mayorship of the village when the dictator took over in 1936. I did political science for 3 years at Wits University. I majored in ancient Greek with the philosophers, and my background was influenced by democratic, and there are lots of sayings that democracy is there for the benefit of all, and not for blacks or whites or Indians or any other race. The ancient democratic talk, writing is about the laws of humanity.
Speaking about democracy, maybe let's go a little bit back to Little Swallows, one of the very few places where you and Dada could sit and relax, if there was such a thing. It's just on Commissioner Street, not too far from police headquarters there, but you could talk and you could dream of a better South Africa. If we may take a trip down memory lane and go back there today, if it were still there, and you would have this conversation with your friend, what would you say, just juxtaposing your ideas that you had of South Africa back then and the reality that we see today? What would you say to him?
Well, you know that there's a chapter there which says how unhappy I am that Nelson Mandela is accused by some of having let a portion of the South African people down. It's nonsense. We actually worked very hard in many ways from the end of 85 to the beginning of, to the end of the regime. I was a runner for Nelson Mandela to Oliver Tambo in Lusaka, in the United Kingdom, in the United States, at the United Nations, in order to negotiate a settlement amongst all the people in South Africa. I think we managed that, not alone. Nobody does anything alone. But Nelson Mandela meant it when he said in the 50s that South Africa belongs to all who live in it. And when he was released, he actually, not very well known, avoided a revolution in South Africa. General Viljoen was preparing with 30,000 soldiers to stop the election. Nelson Mandela called him in and talked him out of it. And he told him that no country where people fought really made good for any. Why doesn't he give up the idea of stopping the election and become a member of parliament himself? He formed a party. He got one himself, one member of parliament. But he took steps to actually reassure all the people in South Africa that nobody is going to be discriminated, nobody will have their property confiscated, nobody is going to be sent out of the country. And this is really what made the transition a transition where there was no bloodshed, where things worked out reasonably well. It is unfortunate that there were things that Nelson Mandela expected to be done have not been done. The question of the land issue, Section 25, has 9 subsections of how you could bring equality in land. The governments, particularly in the last 15 years, has done absolutely nothing of what is expected by the Constitution, which was endorsed by more than 90% of the people of South Africa. And to blame Nelson Mandela for having done wrong to a section of the people is just not on as far as I'm concerned.
Advocate, I have thoroughly enjoyed picking your brain and going through your book, 65 Years of Friendship. I'd like to leave it off by reading the very words of Nelson Mandela, something that he had to say about you, because he was the first to acknowledge that this was not a one-man show, that he did not unilaterally on his own deliver democracy on a silver platter.
He said that
from the get-go. And he says about you, I read and I quote, "I just want to tell you what the name George Bizos means in this country and to me personally. I have already pointed out that we were together at varsity and we were together as barrister, advocate and attorney. And I always think of those days with fond memories, especially because there was a time when it was not so popular to defend cases where freedom fighters were involved. And even today, George Bizos is still very active in the legal field, and the advice that he has given me from time to time I have found very invaluable. In my absence in jail, he became the father of my family and my children, and it is for that reason that the name George Bizos carries with me a particular sentiment which I have never forgotten." Thank you very much for the role that you played, and we thank you so much for this book. It is, I think, one for the history books. It is one for the Christmas stockings as well, if you're wondering what to buy for your loved ones. And it is one for young people to read. I think it has many lessons, not only about history, but about life itself. And so we'll leave it there for the time being. The book is available at Exclusive Books. I understand it's been very well received. Thank you very much for your time, Advocate. It's been a huge pleasure.